I had not slept well in 20 years. That is not entirely accurate. I slept, the body insists on it, but the wolf never did. He ran in the dark behind my closed eyes, circling the same perimeter he had worn into my chest since my 23rd year, when the bond ceremony failed for the second time and my father's healers looked at me with the particular blankness that meant they had no more ideas. The wolf ran. I carried him. We managed. 20 years is a long time to manage. By the time I was 43, the court at Caldenmore had grown around my wolf's temperament the way a forest grows around a stone, not through it, simply around it, leaving a careful clearing at the center where I stood. My counsel met me in the outer hall rather than my study. My generals delivered their reports through a relay of aides when the wolf was running high. The kitchen staff sent trays rather than asking what I wished to eat, because in the early years I had snapped at a kitchen girl who did nothing wrong except appear in the doorway at the wrong moment, and the story had settled into Caldenmore stones the way stories do, permanent and slightly larger than the original. I was not a cruel king. I want to be clear about that. I gave fair judgment. I kept my territory's borders. I did not raise taxes in hard winters. My wolf's agitation had never made me a tyrant. What it had done, what 20 years of unbroken interior noise had done, was make me into a man that people treated with extraordinary care, the kind of care that is indistinguishable from fear. My court was quieter than most. My great hall emptied with unusual efficiency after dinners. The two potential lunas my counsel had introduced in the years, since the failed ceremonies had lasted 3 months and 6 weeks respectively, before sending polite letters of withdrawal that were so carefully worded, I suspected the same scribe had drafted both. The wolf was not violent. He was simply present in a way that other people found unbearable. A constant, low, circling energy that made rooms feel too small and silences feel wrong. I had consulted 3 healers and 2 bond scholars from the Western Territories. The first healer said I needed to accept that some bonds simply did not manifest. The second said the wolf was caught in a search pattern looking for something, and that I should meditate. The third stayed for 2 weeks and then told me with great professional dignity that she had done everything she knew how to do, and she was sorry. I thanked her. I returned to the Eastern Lodge, which my counsel had begun routing me through several years prior under the polite fiction that I preferred the quieter wing. I did prefer it. What I preferred about it was that fewer people were there to notice the wolf. It was in the Eastern Lodge that Saren arrived. I did not see her come. I was at the window, watching frost form along the outer stone in the particular slow way it does in early autumn at Caldenmore, when the temperature drops too quickly for the stone to adjust, and the cold writes itself in patterns across the surface like a language no one has bothered to learn. I was watching this. It was something to watch, and the wolf, when given something to track, would sometimes lower from a run to a walk, and I heard the outer door of the wing open, and then, after a moment, the quiet sounds of someone setting a fire. Not immediately. First there was the sound of wood being stacked, which was deliberate and unhurried, then the scrape of steel against flint, then, after 2 attempts, the particular soft percussion of a fire catching. I did not turn around. The old keeper, I said to the window, retired yesterday. Yes, my lord. Her voice was medium in pitch, not high, not low, unbothered. My father, I've taken the assignment. I turned then because there was something in the way she said it, not the words themselves, but the plainness of them, that was different from the way people in the Eastern Wing generally spoke to me. There was no managed quality to her voice, no careful modulation. She was simply stating a fact, the way you might note that the wood was dry or that the frost was early this year. She was facing the fire when I turned, adjusting a log with a long iron hook, and so I had a moment to look at her before she knew I was looking. Medium height, dark hair braided back and pinned, practical, not decorative. A gray working dress, good cloth but not fine. The hands on the iron hook were steady. "Your name," I said. She turned then, brown eyes darker than I expected. She held my gaze for exactly the right amount of time, not too long, which would have been a challenge, and not too quickly away, which would have been fear. And then she gave the small formal bow that the wing staff used. "Saren, my lord." The wolf inside my chest did something I cannot precisely describe. He did not slow. He did not go still. But there was a fraction of a beat, the gap between one footfall and the next, in which he was simply mid-stride, and the gap was noticeable because it had not happened in some time. Then he continued his circuit, and I turned back to the window. "See that the east corridor fire is maintained through the night," I said. "The stone holds cold poorly." "Yes, my lord." She gathered her things and left. I listened to her footsteps recede down the corridor, even, unhurried, no quicker at the end than at the start, and the wolf ran his circuit, and the frost continued to write its patient language across the stone outside, and the evening came in the way evenings do, without asking permission. I did not think about her again that night. That is not entirely true either. The eastern wing had 5 rooms that required tending. The main chamber where I slept, the study, the outer hall where I received what few people my council deemed necessary to receive directly, the east corridor with its long run of windows, and a small room at the wing's far end that had once been a reading room and was now used to store the lamps. My father's lodge-keeper, Saren's father, I now knew, had maintained this wing for 11 years with the reliability of a man who understood that his primary task was not to be noticed. He appeared when needed and disappeared when not. He kept fires, kept oil in lamps, kept the stones swept. He had been so good at not being noticed that I had, in truth, nearly forgotten he was there. Saren was the same and not the same. She was as quiet. She was as efficient. In those first days, when I was watching without meaning to, she completed her rounds of the wing in the same unhurried rhythm her father must have established. The fires first, the lamps second, the morning tray left outside my chamber door with a small sound that was not quite a knock, but was enough to wake me if I was sleeping, and not enough to disturb me if I was not. She had clearly been trained in this work. She knew exactly where to be and where not to be. What was different was the quality of her presence in the moments when I did see her. Her father, like all the wing's previous staff, had the manner of a man doing his best not to be seen. A particular careful smallness that the people around me often adopted, as though becoming less visible would make the wolf easier to bear. I understood this. I did not blame anyone for it. But over 11 years I had become so accustomed to that careful smallness that it had begun to feel like the natural texture of the air in the eastern wing, a perpetual slight holding of breath. Saren did not hold her breath. She moved through the rooms as though they were simply rooms. She knelt to adjust a hearth fire with the focus of someone doing a task worth doing, not the focus of someone trying to finish quickly. When I was in the outer hall reading and she came to trim the lamp wicks, a task that required approaching within 6 feet of where I sat, she did it without the particular quality of steeled nerves that I had learned to read in people the way a weatherman reads a sky. There was simply no stealing. She came in, trimmed the wicks, checked the oil, and left, and the only acknowledgement of my presence was a quiet "my lord" as she entered and a quiet nothing as she left, because nothing was what the moment needed. The wolf did not slow for this. I want to be clear. In those early days, the wolf ran as he always ran, that low circling agitation that I had long since stopped expecting to change. But there was a quality to the air in rooms after she had been in them that was, I searched for the word and could not find it at the time. Later, I would call it undisturbed. The rooms felt undisturbed, not peaceful in any active sense, but simply as though nothing in them had been asked to be other than what it was. I began to notice, around the 4th day, that I was tracking her movements. Not intentionally. I caught myself noting from my study the sound of the east corridor fire being tended and recognizing it as her by the unhurried rhythm of the work. I caught myself, when the outer hall fell quiet, listening for the small sound of her moving through the lamp room. I was not watching for her. I was simply aware of where she was in the wing. In the way you become aware of a sound that was previously part of the background and has now become something your ear separates from the rest. I told myself this was the wolf's tracking instinct. He tracked things by habit. It meant nothing. On the 7th morning, she did not appear. I was awake early. The wolf's circling always made early mornings difficult, and I waited for the small sound outside my chamber door. That meant the tray had been left. It did not come at the usual time. I waited another quarter hour, which I spent at the window with the frost, and then I went to the outer hall, where the fire was lower than it should have been. I found by mid-morning that Saren had taken a fever. The wing's house steward told me this with the careful neutrality of a man reporting something that he hoped was not a problem. I told him to see that she had what she needed and to arrange temporary coverage for the wing. He bowed and withdrew. The temporary coverage was a young man from the main hall staff who arrived that afternoon with such a pronounced quality of held breath that I sent him to tend only the east corridor and the lamp room, and managed the study and outer hall myself. This was not unusual. I had managed my own rooms before. What was unusual was the wolf. He had been running at his standard pitch all morning, nothing worse, nothing better, but by that afternoon he had moved up a register I did not recognize immediately because it had been so long since I had heard it at that volume. Not the low circling run. Something higher, more urgent. A searching quality that made the muscles between my shoulder blades ache and my jaw set in a way I had not had to consciously manage in some time. I put it down to disruption of routine. The wolf did poorly with disruption of routine. That was a known fact. I managed it through the evening and slept poorly and told myself it would resolve when the routine restored. Saren returned on the 4th day after her fever broke, which is to say the 7th day of her absence. I was in the outer hall with a document I was attempting to read when I heard the outer door of the wing open, and then the particular sound, deliberate, unhurried, of wood being stacked near the east corridor hearth. The wolf went from whatever he had been doing to something that was not quite stillness, but was lower than he had been in 7 days. Inside my chest, the circling lost its edge. I set down the document. This was the moment I began to suspect that something was happening that I did not understand. I did not go to the east corridor. I picked up the document again and continued reading, which I did with somewhat less attention than before, because part of me was listening to the sounds from the corridor and noting against my will, almost that they were the same sounds she always made, the same rhythm, the same unhurried quality. Nothing had changed. She was simply back. And the wolf, who had spent 7 days at a pitch I had not heard from him in years, had settled. I sat with this for the rest of that evening, and I did not find an explanation that satisfied me. Disruption of routine explained the elevation, but routine restored by a specific person, not by any person, not by the temporary staff who had covered her absence, was harder to explain as simply routine. The wing was functioning again. But the wolf had not begun to settle until I heard her at the hearth, not when the outer door opened, not when the temporary staffer arrived each morning, only with the particular sound of her moving through the rooms in that particular way. The wolf knew something I had not yet caught up to. I set the document aside and went to bed. I did not sleep quickly, but I slept better than I had in 7 days, and in the morning the frost was thicker on the window stone than it had been, and Saren's tray appeared outside my chamber door at its usual time, and the wolf ran at his standard circuit, which was not comfortable but was manageable, and the days began again. The weeks that followed were the strangest of my adult life. Strange is not quite right. They were ordinary externally. My council met me in the outer hall on the usual days. My generals sent their reports. The fall progress through Caldenmore's eastern estates was planned and executed, and I rode out for 10 days and returned, and the wolf was elevated through all of it, worse at night, manageable by day, and I noted that I returned from the eastern estates 2 days earlier than planned, and that I did not examine my own reasoning closely enough to know exactly why. What was happening, though I would not have named it this way at the time, was that I was learning to notice. I had spent 20 years in a court of managed distances. The people around me had become very good at being exactly as present as necessary and no more, and I had become very good at accepting this as the natural order of things. Saren was doing nothing differently. She was not closer. She was not warmer. She was not trying in any fashion I could detect to be seen. She was simply present in the rooms the same way she had always been, and I was paying attention. She did not talk much, but when she did, there was no performance to it. One afternoon in the 4th week, I found a lamp in the study that had begun to wick unevenly, a small fault, something that would worsen over days, and I mentioned it because I was standing near it and it was the obvious thing to mention. Saren came to look at it, standing beside me without the usual careful management of distance that people employed around me, and she examined the wick with the same focus she brought to everything she examined, and she said, without looking at me, "The wick's been trimmed too short on one side. I'll replace it this evening." That was all. She didn't look at me to see how I received this information. She didn't adjust her expression to confirm the correct response. She had looked at the lamp, assessed it, told me what she found, and would act on it. This was so ordinary that I cannot explain why I stood there for a moment after she stepped back, looking at the side of her face, before I answered that that would be fine. She had treated the problem as a problem to be solved. She had treated me as a person who could receive information about a lamp. Nothing in her manner suggested that either of these things required special management. I had forgotten, I think, how that felt. I began to find reasons to be in rooms where she was working, not to speak to her. Often we did not speak, but I would bring a book to the east corridor when she was tending the windows there, and I would read, or I would sit at the outer hall table with documents when the lamp room needed its weekly work, and she moved quietly in and out, and the wolf would carry on at his circuit, but the searching pitch, the elevated urgency he had acquired during her 7-day absence, did not return. On a morning in the 6th week, I came to the outer hall early to find that she had left, along with the tray, a small branch of late autumn berries from the Caldenmore hedges in a clay cup on the table. Nothing remarkable. They were common berries, the kind that hold on through the first frosts. The cup was a plain cup from the Wings' kitchen. There was no note. There was no ceremony. Someone had noticed that the table was bare and that the season offered something small and had put it there. I sat down at the table and looked at it for a long time. No one had done something like that for me, not for a reason, not as a calculation, not as an approach, in so long that I could not accurately remember the last time. The court gave me gifts, certainly, on the appropriate occasions. My counsel presented reports with appropriate ceremony. My generals commended themselves and their victories. Everything that arrived in my life arrived with a purpose, and that purpose had to do with me as the Alpha King of Caldenmore, the position I occupied, the decisions I made, the power I held or might direct. Saren had noticed a bare table. The season had something to put on it. That was the whole of it. The wolf went quiet for approximately 3 seconds. Then he resumed his circuit. But 3 seconds in 20 years is notable. It was my counsel who complicated things, as counsels do. Torvin, my head counselor, a man of great practical intelligence and limited imagination, had been patiently managing the question of a Luna for Caldenmore since my first bond ceremony had failed at 23. He had introduced the 2 candidates, arranged the healer consultations, overseen the polite management of my life with the particular dedication of a man who believed that the right administrative solution could be found for any problem, given enough application. He arrived at the Eastern Lodge on a morning in the 7th week with 2 aides, and the expression of a man delivering news he had rehearsed. The gist of it was this: the council had reviewed the lodge assignments, and in the interest of more efficient use of wing staff, they were recommending that the Eastern Lodge's keeper be rotated to the southern quarter, which had greater traffic and would benefit from her competence. A more junior staff member would cover the Eastern Wing, which had, after all, only one resident and modest daily needs. I heard this out. Torvin was not wrong, practically speaking. The Eastern Wing had one resident. Saren's competence was real, and the southern quarter had more daily demands. This was the kind of administrative adjustment that happened in any large household, arrived at by reasonable people applying reasonable logic to the available facts. I said, when? End of the week, my lord. If that is agreeable. It was agreeable. It was an administrative matter. I told Torvin it was fine, and he withdrew with his aides, clearly relieved that there had been no difficulty, and I returned to the document I had been reading, which was a quarterly report on Caldenmore's eastern estates, and I read it for approximately 4 minutes before I accepted that I was reading the same line repeatedly without taking it in. The wolf had changed pitch. Not to the searching elevation I had noted during her fever, something different. Not elevated in frequency, low actually, lower than usual, but dense. Thick. A quality I had no good word for, something between resistance and refusal, not as sound but as weight, spreading outward from the center of my chest. I set the document down. I spent the next 2 days telling myself this was anticipatory disruption of routine, which is a thing I had experienced before in smaller ways. The wolf always ran higher in the days before a known change to schedule. This was the same mechanism, simply larger because the change was larger. When Saren was reassigned and the new staff settled into the wing and the new routine established itself, the wolf would adjust. This was reasonable. I believed it for approximately 48 hours. On the morning of the 3rd day, the day before her reassignment, I was in the East Corridor at dawn, earlier than I normally rose because the wolf had not permitted much sleep, and I heard her in the lamp room. The small, familiar sounds: oil being checked, glass being polished. The particular order she did things in, which I knew now without meaning to know it. And something in me that was not the wolf, or was the wolf, operating below the level of the circuit he ran, deeper than I had known he went, simply became clear. Not decided, clear. The way the frost on the windowstone becomes clear at dawn when the light catches it, you did not decide to see it, it simply resolves. I knew what she was. I had known, I thought, for some time. The 7 days of elevated searching during her fever. The 3 seconds of quiet when she put berries on a bare table. The way I had learned the rhythm of her movements through the wing without trying. The way my returns from the eastern estates had become calibrated to something I had been refusing to name. The wolf had been telling me for weeks. I had been managing him for 20 years, and so I had, with great practiced thoroughness, also managed the thing he was trying to say. I went to the lamp room. She was on a low stool with the second lamp, glass in one hand, cloth in the other. She turned when she heard me, not startled, simply turning, the way she always simply turned, and held my gaze with that same quality, the one that was neither challenge nor fear, just the ordinary fact of 2 people in the same room. "My lord," she said. "You're being reassigned," I said. "Yes," she set the lamp down, not quickly. "I heard yesterday, the southern quarter. I am asking you not to go." There was a pause, not a long one. She looked at me, really looked, in the way she rarely did directly, and I held still for it, the way you hold still for something that costs something. "My lord," she said carefully, "the council's reasoning is." "Sound," I said. "Their reasoning is sound. The southern quarter has more traffic. Your competence is being used well there. I know the reasoning." I stopped. The wolf was that dense, resistant weight in my chest, not circling now but still braced like a thing that has decided not to be moved. I'm not asking you to stay as a lodge keeper. The lamp room was small. The single east-facing window was gray with early light, not yet truly dawn but past the full dark. Her face in that light was very clear. She was looking at me with an expression I could not entirely read, not fear, not calculation, something that was considering carefully what I had said, and not yet finished considering it. "My lord," she said, and then stopped. "Calder," I said. "My name is Calder." Another pause, shorter. "Calder," she said. The wolf inside my chest stopped moving. Not the 3-second pause I had noted with the berries, not the fractional beat between strides I had noticed in the first moments of her arrival. He stopped, fully. The circuit he had been running, the low, circling, 20-year agitation that had driven healers away and hollowed out my sleep and shaped my court into a careful clearing around a stone, went quiet. The quiet was so complete that it was disorienting. I had been carrying that sound for so long that its absence was its own kind of noise. I stood in it, blinking slightly, the way you blink when you step from a dark room into daylight, and the adjustment takes a moment. Saren was watching me. She had seen something in my face. I did not know what, I could not see my own face, and she was watching me the way she watched the fire she was building, with full attention and no agenda. "Something happened," she said, not a question, an observation. "Yes," I said. She waited. "My wolf," I said, "he has been running. For 20 years he has been running, agitated, looking for something." I stopped. I was not a man who explained himself. I had spent 20 years not explaining this, partly because explaining it required acknowledging it more fully than I found comfortable, and partly because the people I might have explained it to were all managing me so carefully that the conversation felt impossible before it started. Saren was watching me without managing me. The difference was significant. I have not slept a full night without it in 20 years. A long pause this time. "I know," she said quietly, "the wing staff my father told me before I came." She looked down at the lamp she'd set on the floor. "He said you were a fair man who was very alone." She looked back up. That was his exact description. I did not speak for a moment. "Your father," I said at last, "was not wrong." "No," she was still watching me, that careful, clear attention. "He usually isn't." A pause. "What happened just now to your wolf?" "He stopped," I said. "When you said my name, he stopped." The gray light in the window was changing. Real dawn coming now, the first pale wash of it. Saren was very still on her stool, the lamp cloth folded in her hands, not because she had chosen to fold it but because her hands had naturally done something with themselves while she thought. She looked at the cloth, then back at me. "I don't know anything about bond ceremonies," she said, "or mate marks or—" She stopped herself. "I'm a lodgekeeper's daughter. I know fires and lamps and floor stone." Another pause, shorter. "I'm not who your council would choose." "No," I agreed. "Or who the territory would expect." "No." She looked at me for a long moment. "You've been very alone," she said, not as a question and not quite as a statement, more as the thing you say aloud to confirm you have understood something correctly. "Yes," I said. She nodded once slowly, the way she moved when she had made a decision. She stood up from the stool. She was shorter than me by half a head, and she looked up at me with those dark eyes that had never held fear, not in the first moment and not now, and she said, "I wasn't planning to want anything from you." "I know," I said, "that's why." She was quiet for a moment, taking this in. Then, "That's a very strange thing to say." "It is," I agreed. The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, something more private than a smile. "I'm going to finish the lamps," she said, "and then I think you should tell your council something." "Yes," I said. I turned to leave. Then I stopped because the wolf, the still, quiet wolf, had for the first time in 20 years done something I did not expect. He was not circling. He was not running. He was simply present, resting the way you rest when you are in the right place after a very long walk. And from that resting place, with something that was not urgency but was warm and entirely certain, he turned toward her. Not toward the direction she was in, toward her. The way he had always turned toward things he was tracking, but different. The way you turn toward home. I went to find Torvin. My head counselor received the news with the expression of a man who has been moving one piece of furniture for 11 years and has been told it will be staying where it is. I told him that Saren, the Eastern Lodgekeeper's daughter, would not be reassigned. I told him that she would be remaining in the Eastern Wing. I told him, in the direct way I have always preferred, that the reason for this was not administrative, and that he would need to begin the conversation with the territory's bond scholars that should have been had 11 years ago, specifically the conversation about what it means when a wolf's 20-year search pattern resolves. Torvin was quiet for a moment. He was a man who processed information carefully before responding, which was one of the reasons I had kept him as head counselor for as long as I had. The search pattern, he said, you're saying it resolved. This morning, I said, yes. He was quiet again. I watched him work through it, the implications for the territory, for succession, for the council's planning, and then I watched him, to his credit, set most of that aside and arrive at the simpler thing. My lord, he said, is she? He stopped and started again. Are you certain? My wolf has not been still in 20 years, I said. He is still now. I met Torvin's eyes. Yes, I am certain. Torvin was quiet for a longer moment. Then he did something I had not seen from him often. He bowed. Not the administrative bow. The other one. Then we will begin, he said. The days that followed were busy in the way that changes are always busy. The logistics of a thing that everyone has been waiting for without knowing they were waiting, running suddenly into motion. The bond scholars arrived from the Western territories, different scholars than the healers. Scholars who dealt not in the remediation of broken bonds, but in the recognition of intact ones, and who had, I gathered from their careful words in those first meetings, been expecting this call for some time. What they told me confirmed what the wolf had already told me in the lamp room at dawn. The mate bond had been present for the full 20 years, not absent, not broken, not incomplete, present. The wolf's circling agitation was not a failure of the bond but a response to it. He had been running the circuit of a connection that existed but was not yet complete, looking for the other end. What I had experienced as an unbroken interior noise was, in the scholar's careful language, the bond in a state of incompletion, not wrong, not damaged, simply waiting. They used the word latent. They said the mate bond had been latent, waiting for the specific element that would activate it. And that element, I said. The older scholar, a woman with silver hair and the particular steady quality of someone who has spent decades studying things that cannot be forced, looked at me over the papers on her desk and said, "In your case, my lord, it appears to have been the presence of the mate herself." I thought about this. You're saying that the bond needed her to be near. The bond needed her presence without agenda, the scholar said carefully. This is not common, but it is documented. Wolves who have run a long search, particularly in difficult bond histories, sometimes require not simply proximity but a particular quality of proximity, an uncalculated nearness. She paused. Someone who was not trying to resolve the wolf, who simply existed near him. I thought about Saren on her stool in the lamp room, polishing glass, about the east corridor with the late light coming through and her at the window frames with her cloth, not glancing over, simply working, about the berries in the clay cup. She wasn't trying, I said. No, the scholar said, that appears to have been essential. I told Saren all of this. Not in a formal meeting, not in the outer hall with the council present, which was where Torvin would have arranged it. I told her in the east corridor in the evening when the fires were burning and the frost was again on the outer stone. She sat in the chair by the hearth that I had, without quite planning it, begun to think of as the chair that faced mine. And I sat in mine, and I told her what the scholars had said. She listened the way she always listened, with that complete, undivided attention that asked nothing and observed everything. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "So for 20 years," she said, "your wolf was looking for someone who wasn't trying to find him." "Yes," I said. She thought about this. She stopped. "That's a very difficult thing to ask the territory to arrange." "It is," I agreed. "It is not something the council could have found by looking for it." "No," she said, "you can't look for someone who isn't looking." She was quiet again. Then, "What does it mean for me? For what I am now?" I had thought about how to answer this. "It means," I said, "that the bond is yours to accept or refuse. The scholars were clear that the activation in the lamp room, my wolf going still, was recognition on his part. It is not a claiming. I have not claimed you. I will not claim you without your choice." She was looking at the fire. I could see the side of her face in the firelight, the careful quality of her attention. "If I refuse," she said, "then you are reassigned as the council planned, and you are a lodge-keeper's daughter who tendered an eastern wing for 7 weeks, and you have my gratitude and my apology for any disruption the assignment caused you." I paused. "And my wolf runs his circuit for whatever time remains to me. That is a known quantity. It is manageable." She turned to look at me. "You've been managing it for 20 years. "Yes." "And she stopped again, not searching for words, choosing them. "It's not good," she said, not a question. "No," I said, "it is not good." She turned back to the fire. The silence was the ordinary kind, the kind that had always been ordinary between us, and I did not press it. She would think as long as she needed to think, and then she would say what she had decided, because that was the way she did everything. It took her the length of time it takes a fire to shift and settle once. "I'm not a noble," she said. "My father kept lamps." "I know. The territory will. The territory will adjust," I said. "Territories do. Your council has already begun the necessary conversations," I said. "Torvin is a practical man. He has had 11 years of the alternative." She looked at me again. In the firelight, her eyes were very dark and very clear. "You're not," she stopped, started again. "You're not asking this because you have no other option." "I have other options," I said. "I have managed for 20 years. I will manage further if I must. I'm asking because—" I stopped. The wolf was still, that warm, certain stillness. From it I could speak honestly, which is something I had found increasingly difficult over the years of careful distance. "Because I came to the lamp room this morning to ask you to stay, and you said my name, and something in me went quiet that has not been quiet since I was 23. And because in 7 weeks you put berries on a bare table and fixed an unevenly wicking lamp and moved through my rooms as though they were simply rooms, and it was—" I stopped again. It was the first time in a long time that I felt like I was simply a person in rooms, not a problem to be managed. She was very still. "You were simply a person in rooms," she said softly. "Yes." She looked at the fire for another long moment. The warm light moved across the stone floor between us. "Then I'll stay," she said. "Not because you need me to, because I want to." She glanced at me. "There's a difference." "I know," I said. "That's why I waited until you said so." The bond recognition ceremony was held in the Eastern Lodge's outer hall, not the great hall of Caldenmore's main keep. This was my choice. The great hall had the territory's full council, and its ranking families and the long history of that room's architecture, which was built for ceremony. The Eastern Lodge's outer hall had 6 stone pillars, a pair of east-facing windows, and fires in both hearths. It was a room that had simply been a room. It seemed right. Saren stood across from me in her gray dress. Not the working one, a better one, fine cloth, the same simple cut. because she had looked at the gown Torvin's steward had attempted to present and said, with perfect politeness, that she would wear her own. I had agreed before anyone could protest. This was, I thought, extremely characteristic of her, and I found that I was glad. The bond scholar read the traditional recognition words, which are not vows. There are separate vows, said later, in private, but acknowledgement. What exists? What has been found? The mate bond between a wolf and his mate is not made by ceremony. Ceremony is the territory's way of witnessing what is already true. When she said my name in the ceremony as it required, as she had said it in the lamp room at dawn, the wolf was still. Not the surprised stillness of the lamp room, something settled, established, the kind of quiet that belongs to a thing that has found where it was going and arrived. I took her hand. The old form, right hand to right hand, the fingers laced, the way the recognition ceremonies have done it in Caldenmore for 400 years. Her hand was steady. I knew it would be. Torvin and the assembled council bowed their heads. They were, all of them, people who had spent 11 years in the careful management of a king whose wolf would not settle, and they were bowing not with the careful performance of relief, but with something simpler. Recognition, I thought. The same thing the wolf had done in the lamp room. They could see what was there. The territory adjusted. I had told Saren it would, and it did, in the way territories have always adjusted when their alpha finds his mate, with a combination of genuine rejoicing and practical recalibration, and a certain amount of grumbling in the outer circles that quiets when people see, in daily life, what the thing actually looks like. What it looked like was this: a king who slept through the night. A king who attended the morning council sessions, without the particular edge that had made those sessions something his counselors braced themselves for. A great hall that felt like a great hall again, with people in it at the right distances, rather than the careful managed distances of 11 years. And Saren, who moved through Caldenmore's rooms, all of them, now not only the eastern wing, the same way she had always moved through rooms, attending to what was there, not performing her presence, not managing her position. When the territory's ranking families were presented to her in the formal way such things are done, she received them with the straightforward attention she brought to everything, asked questions that were relevant rather than diplomatic, and remembered what she was told, which is something people notice. The counselors who had recommended her reassignment, Torvin and his 2 aides, never quite said anything about it directly. But Torvin, who was not a man given to personal observations, said to me one morning after a council session, "The wing assignments are sorted. No further changes recommended." I understood what he meant. The Eastern Lodge remained hers in the practical sense. She had not abandoned the fires there. I found, in the weeks after the ceremony, that she still kept a hand in the wing's maintenance, not because it was her assignment, but because the habit of doing a thing well does not leave a person just because the formal task has ended. One evening I came through the east corridor to find her trimming the lamp wicks, cloth in hand, with the same focused attention as always. I stopped in the doorway. She looked up, that corner of the mouth motion, more private than a smile. "Force of habit," she said. "Don't stop on my account," I said. She looked back at the lamp. I wasn't going to. I leaned against the door frame and watched her work, and the wolf was still in the deep, settled way he had been still since the lamp room at dawn. Not the stillness of an absence, but the stillness of a thing at rest. Something at rest does not mean something silent. It means something that is exactly where it should be and knows it. Outside the east-facing windows, the frost was writing its patient language on the stone. Saren trimmed the last wick, checked the oil level with the same practiced efficiency as always, and set the lamp back on its shelf. She looked at the row of them, lit, clean, in order, with the quiet satisfaction of a person who has done a thing correctly. "Done," she said, not to me in particular, just to the room. "Good," I said. We went to dinner. The thing I think about most in the years since the lamp room is what the Bond scholar said, that the Bond needed a presence without agenda, an uncalculated nearness, someone who was not trying to resolve the wolf. I think about this because it is, in its way, the strangest love story I know. Not the one you tell at feasts, not the alpha king who tamed a beast or broke a curse or stopped a ceremony and claimed a woman before the pack. What happened at Caldenmore was quieter than that and harder to describe, and I think more true. A woman came to tend a wing. She did her work. She did not try to fix me. She put berries on a bare table when the season offered them, because the table was bare and the season had something to give. She said my name in a lamp room at dawn, and something in me that had been running for 20 years stopped running. That is the whole of it. And yet it is not the whole of it, because the whole of it is the winter that followed, and the spring after that, and the way she asks questions that are relevant rather than diplomatic, and the way she still tends the east corridor lamps by force of habit, and the way the wolf is still, not because she quieted him, but because he found the other end of what he was looking for and arrived and rested. 20 years is a long time to run. But you do not measure a search by how long it took. You measure it by what you find. I found her in the east corridor of my own lodge, in a gray dress, with a cloth in her hand, not looking for me. And the wolf, who had run his circuit longer than I had words for, simply stopped. "Home," he said, in the language that is not words. "Yes," I said, "I know."